I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Carmen Lauzon-Gatmaytan from the Philippines. She, until recently, was program manager of the Initiatives for International Dialogue, where she was in charge of training, internships, and the exchange program. In 2007, she also entered the formation of a regional women's network called the Asian Circle 1325, and she will share some contributions from that experience. The Asian Circle 1325 is composed of women from IID's focus areas and member organizations from the GPPAC's Southeast Asia chapter that advocates for the implementation of 1325. Carmen currently serves as a council member of the Mindanao People's Caucus and is also a member of a national network in the Philippines called Women Engaged in Action on 1325. Carmen.
Thank you, Joessa. Thank you. Good morning. There are two main sharings that I would like to give this morning. One is on how we were able to promote women, peace, and security agenda in the Philippines, and the other one is on the level of the region, the Southeast Asia region, in Southeast Asia. I have divided my presentation into four main parts. One is a background on the Philippine National Action Plan on 1325, and then the second part is on highlighting the 1325 work in Mindanao, our peace process in Mindanao, which is the southern part of the country, which is affected by armed conflict. And the third part is on our regional level initiatives. This is what Jessa was saying, the Asian Circle initiatives and the GPPAC Southeast Asia initiatives engaging the ASEAN, or the Regional Intergovernmental Organization. And lastly will be some conclusions and lessons learned from this experience that we had. On the Philippine National Action Plan 1325, we're looking at the timeline from 2007 to 2012. We were saying that as early as 2007, we were talking about how we will be able to implement 1325 on the national level. So a group of my colleagues from the peace movement, from the human rights movement, have been talking about it in Manila, while we were based in Davao, have been talking about it also among ourselves, especially we are the conflict-affected areas. So we happened to come together because of these two levels of initiative on the national level and down in the regional, in the local level. So we came together in early 2008. And then after that, a series of national consultations have been conducted. And then eventually, we were able to form a preparatory committee, which is composed of civil society and government representatives. And then we were able to do regional cluster consultations, 6 cluster consultations nationwide. We divided the provinces into 6 regions. So we had consultations, and then we had the results of these consultations were brought into 2 national validation workshops. So that created the National Action Plan. So by March 2010, we were able to launch our Philippine National Action Plan. And then part of the Philippine National Action Plan was a mechanism by the government, which has created an executive order to establish a national steering committee. But this is mainly composed of government agencies. They have thought initially of having the civil society, the women and peace advocates groups, to be a part of that, but we said that it should not be mixed like that. So we said that we will be creating our own mechanism as civil society. So we created our Women Engaged in Action on 1325. So this is now the body that will interact with the government body that will implement the 1325. So the WE Act, the Women Engaged in Action on 1325, was launched in November 2010. And then after that, we had a process by which the government led the enhancement of the indicators that we have included in the National Action Plan. So we did that in 2011, and then by the end of last year, 2011, we were able to consolidate the different initiatives of our members under the We Act 1325, and we've came up with this publication. This is the initial initiatives, a compilation of all the work that we've been doing on the ground in the national level. So all the members of the We Act were able to contribute how we were able to do implementing 1325 on the ground from the north to the southern part of the country. So this is one of the projects that we were able to do by end of last year. And then now we are in the stage that we're trying to localize. We're moving the National Action Plan in the local level, engaging the communities, engaging the conflict-affected areas, the women, the government agencies, the security sector. So we're now in that stage. So we're doing a lot of this. And in fact, some of the activities we've been having as quite a lot of in partnership with some of our networks in the international level also, like the GNWP, the GPPAC Southeast Asia, in the Asian Circle. And some of these localization exercises have been engaging a lot of men also, especially in the security sector. I'm about to show some pictures here, like in this workshop where we have the Philippine National Police and the Philippine Armed Forces engage in some discussions on localizing our National Action Plan. So next, now, in terms of the Mindanao-based civil society initiatives, I'd just like to highlight the work that we do in the Initiatives for International Dialogue, is because we are also serving as a secretariat for a coalition of different peace NGOs in the Philippines, especially those who are based in Mindanao. We call it the Mindanao Peace Weavers. And that Peace Weavers, that coalition, the network of networks of peace groups, was able to develop in 2010 a Mindanao People's Peace Agenda. And we deliberately included the agenda on 1325 implementation. So we have a provision in that Mindanao People's Peace Agenda on 1325. And then there are also other members of our groups in Mindanao which doing a lot of work in terms of human rights and peace building advocacy. So I've highlighted some of these groups like the Consortium of Bangsamoro Civil Society, the Mothers for Peace, which is part of the Mindanao Commission of Women, an NGO also. And then there's a Mindanao People's Caucus. And this is an important point because some of these are members of our network who are doing very innovative activities and initiatives towards implementing 1325. And as I've mentioned, the Mindanao People's Caucus, when we were still partly working together, because we were also serving as the secretariat in the early 2000, mid-2000, we were able to do a ceasefire watch monitoring project, and we call it locally Bantay Ceasefire. Bantay means watch, a watchdog, a civil society watchdog composed of grassroots communities who are affected by the conflicts. And then recently also, the all-women contingent in the civilian protection component of the international monitoring team. I will have to discuss this further in my next slides. And then other groups which are all part of the Muslim civil society. We have the Bangsamoro Women Solidarity Forum. We have the Nisa Ulhak, the Bangsamoro. We have Nurul Salam, which have been engaging the role of women in Islam. So that kind of groups that have been happening also in Mindanao. So the impacts that we've been making in the Mindanao peace process, one of which is that in the peace negotiations between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which is one of the rebel groups in Mindanao, we've been very strong and vocal about ensuring that there are women peace negotiators in both panels. There's no problem with the government. In fact, they were able to immediately name members of the panel who are coming from the women sector and who are also coming from the We Act membership. So they are also part of our network. And then the other challenge was on the part of the rebel group, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. It was not so easy for them coming from that Islamic perspective that, you know, women is more or less on supporting role to men, and they were saying that they would have wanted, but women are not really coming out. The Muslim women are not really coming out. But eventually, they were able to name as part of their board of consultants 2 women that advises the panel, which is all composed of men. And these 2 women are again members of We Act. They're also part of our network on 1325, the civil society network. And then the other mechanism where we are able to make an impact on is on the ceasefire mechanism. I mentioned earlier that there's this the ceasefire watchdog, the civil society initiative. Well, actually, in the peace process between the government and the More Islamic Liberation Front, as early as 1997, there was already a ceasefire agreement, so cessation of hostilities. But from then on, we've noted a lot of violations from both sides. So it was in 2003 when we started to engage, and we were able to identify violations from both sides, and we were able to bring this on both sides. And then part of that is the ceasefire committee, the mechanism that was composed, is an international monitoring team. So the international monitoring team is composed of different countries, representatives from OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries. We also have the Malaysia, and then we also have the Brunei and Libya. They send contingents. This is like a peacekeeping contingent deployed in Mindanao. But this is unarmed. What they're doing is like a deterrent. The presence is a deterrent for the violations of the ceasefire agreement. So they call themselves the International Monitoring Team. And then in 2009, they agreed to have a civilian component of that International Monitoring Team. And the civilian component will ensure the civilian protection. And what the Mindanao People's Caucus did is to be part of that mechanism, and there are other NGOs who have been recognized to be part of the civilian protection component, but they are all composed of men. And MPC did was to have an all-women contingent. So they identified an all-women deployment to monitor civilian protection. So at this point, I'd like to show a video, a short video, 3-minute video on the work of the all-women contingent to the International Monitoring Team. This is just very, very short. How do I play this one? This is how we were able to launch an all-women contingent on civilian protection of the International Monitoring Team. There are several trainings and conferences that we were able to organize. Right now, actually, there are about at least 30 volunteers in 5 outposts in very critical areas. No, they are like a 24/7 volunteers monitoring civilian protection, and this is really like the embodiment of the 1325. Women in the forefront, women implementing the resolution of 1325, like, and even protecting the rights, the human rights, the welfare of civilians, especially the women and children, documenting violations, and even engaging the conflict actors on the ground. So I specifically requested my colleagues in the Mindanao People's Caucus to have a 3-minute video to show these women in action, the all-women component to the civilian protection. The areas that we've been doing, like, they do foot patrols. they visit areas. Well, of course, there's some logistics like the boats, the motorbikes, going to the very difficult areas of Mindanao just to look into the situation of the conflict and in the situation of the internally displaced persons, the women and children, the widows, and even in preventing clashes, preventing conflict, actual violence on the ground. This is actually in the YouTube, and I can share with you also the link. A lot of these have been happening over the last year, and as I said, there are about at least 30 volunteers, and the age range from 20s to the 60s. We have as old as 60-year-old women who are community leaders from the indigenous communities, from the Muslim women, from the Christian settlers. And we're doing a lot of partnership building, like the men, engaging also the men, especially since the international monitoring team, for instance, are all men. And those who are in the conflict parties are basically all men. And we do a lot of networking also with international groups who are doing protection work on the ground in Mindanao. So I'll just move on to my next presentation. I'll just continue on with the sharing about I'll move on to my other slides. This is more the sharing of what we were able to do. Like, as I said, we have this network of the We Act, Women Engaged in Action on 1325. Recently, we have developed a proposal to both panels. We decided to submit concrete recommendations on how 1325 should be implemented even in the negotiations, because right now there is possibility of coming up with a comprehensive peace agreement by the end of the year. And the same thing with the Asian Circle 1325, we were able to submit a proposal, and some of these are basically about how to ensure the women's participation during the negotiation and even post-agreement. When agreement has been signed, where are the women? So we wanted to make sure that they are there. So we have concrete proposals on that, especially on power sharing, resource sharing, and even in terms of the DDR, what we call it normalization and disposition of forces. And then in terms of transitional justice. The other thing that we were able to submit also is in terms of ensuring that there will be women in the transition commission. There is going to be a transitional mechanism wherein from this stage up to the concretization of the agreement, there should be some women who will be named by both the government and the MILF. And then in the recently positive development within this month only, where both parties were able to sign a framework agreement, there were already reflections of how 1325 or women agenda has been reflected, and these were reflected in 3 provisions inside the agreement right now. I'm not going to highlight that anymore, but it's basically about the rights of women to meaningful political participation, equal opportunities, and even in the normalization, the DDR aspect. On the regional level, we were able to do a lot of engagement with the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and 2 proposals have been submitted also by GPPAC and the Asian Circle. One is on how the ASEAN Commission on Women and Children should be able to address the situation of women in armed conflict. Because out of the 10 countries in the region, there are at least 4 which is affected by intra-state conflict, and not counting the interstate conflict that is also happening among the states in the Southeast Asia. And then a submission also that we made on the Human Rights Declaration, because ASEAN wants to have a Human Rights Declaration. We said the women should be articulated there. So we have made 4 very specific languages to be incorporated in that Human Rights Declaration of ASEAN. So this is what we are doing right now. We've been trying to move towards how we can really make that realized. I'm not going to talk about the challenge, but to wrap up, I want to move on to this very important thing in terms of the lessons. I have identified 5 I's. Not I, but the I's. One is on innovative initiatives. It's important for us as women to be innovative in our initiatives. So in our strategies, in our approaches, and how we build blocks. And then the second I is on intervention. At the right time, with the right approach. And as I was saying, it was good that we were able to intervene with our submissions to the peace panels. We were able to intervene at the right time, calling for them to name women in their panels. And then now we're calling for women in the Transition Commission. But we need to be very creative also in our approaches. And then the third is the interface or the interaction. It's important to have government NGO interaction. That's what we were doing in the WE Act. But it's also important that we have friendly allies in the government. And it's just fortunate, it's a bonus for us that our presidential advisor is from the feminist, the women's rights and the peace movement, civil society personalities. There are also personalities within the cabinet of the president who are formerly civil society. So that helps a lot. And then the fourth I is on the intra-civil society, which we call building constituency within the civil society movement, within the social movement. And lastly is on inspiration. We have to be inspired, we have to continue inspiring each other, and we have to get some motivations on the little gains that we were able to win and move this towards to bigger gains. That's all, and thank you very much.